in this episode of the Critical Oxygen Podcast. The substrates that you're going to be oxidizing, right, should primarily be fats if you're closer to that zone 2, but you're going to be oxidizing a certain amount of carbohydrates the entire time. This is, unless you're standing here or doing a really, really slow walk, you're almost never primarily burning, just fats. So you're going to be burning some combination of fats and carbohydrates. And the longer you go in that long workout without fueling, the greater that shift is going to be away from carbohydrates, because you're going to be depleting your carbohydrate stores towards fat oxidation. Welcome to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today I'm joined by Dave Schell, founder and head coach of Kaizen Endurance, for another episode of Fast Physiology, where we do a succinct dive into a single endurance topic. In today's episode, we are going to explore the question, what's the point of a long workout, and how does it improve your performance? Enjoy. Dave Schell, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, always fun. So on today's episode of Fast Physiology, Dave and I want to talk about the purpose and the physiology behind long workouts. This is something that I've kind of been thinking about quite a bit lately, just in the context of training and other things like that. So I'm going to be interested to hear, Dave, what your kind of what your reasoning is behind the purpose for a long workout, and then we can kind of just go from there, because I think I have some thoughts, but I'm gonna collect them while you go first.
Okay. So I guess I'll start with, I think that it's really important for people that are focusing on long, and when I say long, I'm talking like 3+ hour events, which are primarily the cyclists that I'm working with. And so I think, in addition to the physiology, which I'm sure you're going to dive into, I think the big thing, and I think this is what people maybe lose sight of a lot of times, it's the specificity. And so just knowing how your body's going to respond. So are your shoulders going to get tight? Is your neck going to hurt? Have you been on the saddle that long? And then I think nutrition gets really, I think it changes a lot after 3 hours too. And so what you can get away with for 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe isn't going to work for 5+ hours. And so, yeah, I think for me, those are some of the big things. And I guess the last thing I'll say is just the psychology behind it. Is if you've never been on your bike for 6 hours before, and all of a sudden you're out there and like getting in your head and things are getting dark, it's like you need to experience that before race day, so you know how to handle it.
Yeah. Oh man, you touched on a lot of really good things there. I'll start with the physiology behind things. So, well, actually, let's just start with like what is a long workout, right? What sort of intensities and stuff are you supposed to be doing? Because a long workout is going to be something that's probably, if you're looking at like a 5-zone model, it's probably going to be between zone 2 and the top of zone 3. Mm-hmm. So like, maybe just reaching up to the point of zone 2 all the way to, the top of zone 3, which top of zone 3 is going to be like your threshold, like your 90% FTP, or however you want to define it. So, with these long workouts, they're going to be 90+ minutes, I would say, depending on where you're starting and where you're going and those sort of things. And with that, then, so that's what a long workout is 90+ minutes between, essentially zone 2. It could be a little bit lower than zone 2 as well. Like, you can certainly get benefits from that, especially if you're extending this out like 3, 4, 5 hours, then there's no way you're going to be able to do 90 minutes, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think for cyclists, 90 minutes might be a fairly short workout versus a runner. And then, like you said, I think it's duration dependent, where if somebody's going out, like heading out the door to do a 6+ hour ride, like it might be on the low end of zone 2 versus, continue.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously that's going to depend on, what your purpose is and other things like that. But as you start to do this long ride, you are going to be the substrates that you're going to be oxidizing, right? Should primarily be fats if you're closer to that zone 2, but you're going to be oxidizing a certain amount of carbohydrates the entire time. This is, unless you're standing here or doing a really really slow walk, you're almost never primarily burning just fats. So you're going to be burning some combination of fats and carbohydrates. And the longer you go in that long workout without fueling, the greater that shift is going to be away from carbohydrates, because you're going to be depleting your carbohydrate stores towards fat oxidation. And this is important because this is kind of, it's going to stimulate different pathways in your body depending on if you're early on, if you're later on in the workout, and if you're fueling or if you're, really, really not fueling in a sense. If you aren't fueling and you're doing everything just kind of fasted, first of all, you're going to feel awful, especially at the end of the workout. And second of all, you're going to get really, really, you're going to start to shift towards more fat oxidation towards the end. And if you, are trying to exercise at something that's higher than that zone 2, closer to that threshold or maybe race pace or something along those lines, then you might get to a point in your long run or long workout where you have to slow down because you feel awful. This is some people will describe this as like the bonk or something along those lines. And the reason for that is because fat oxidation actually does not produce as much energy as quickly as carbohydrate oxidation actually is. So when you are, if you experience that bonk, you're getting tired because your body can no longer supply as much ATP, and it's having to shift or rely more on fat oxidation. It's just kind of the nature of it. However, that is a very strong stimulus for adaptation in terms of, being able to oxidize fats for longer, more effectively, other things like that. I'm not saying that you should do fasted long workouts. I'm just saying that is physiologically kind of how things change throughout the long workout. Now, if you're actually, fueling properly, which means taking in some level of carbohydrate throughout your entire long workout, then you should not experience, this drastic shift from, to purely fats. You should always be oxidizing some level of fats and some level of carbohydrates the entire time. And again, like I think one of the big stimuli that your body is going to undergo during a long workout is just extended periods of substrate turnover, so carbohydrate and fat turnover. So you're teaching your body to get better at mobilizing and oxidizing those substrates, as well as just continued low level cardiac output increases. So you're going to get stimulation of like your central system, your cardiovascular system to deliver more oxygen to the working muscle, and you're going to get stimulation of the muscle being able to utilize more substrates more effectively in an aerobic manner. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've got a question on that, and this is something I've often wondered about. So, I don't know, a few years ago, there was this idea of like train high, train low with carbohydrates, meaning like some days you should train with a lot, and some days you could train with low availability, so that you do kind of train your body to be able to use both fats and carbohydrate. So that's one thing we'll put off for a moment. But my bigger question here is, when we're ingesting carbohydrate during a ride, are we sparing muscle glycogen, or does it still use a muscle glycogen first and then rely on blood glucose?
It's probably a mixture. It's not like one of those things where it's like, oh, because I have muscle glycogen available to me, I'm only going to be using that first. It's if you have higher levels of blood glucose in your blood, or blood glucose just in general, then your body is going to be uptaking and utilizing that blood glucose. It's not an all or nothing sort of thing. Just like, surprise, surprise, your muscle actually has fat in it. So your
Yeah.
muscle is also going to be using the fat within the muscle, those fat stores, but it's also going to be using the fat that's coming from your adipose tissue or your fat cells and being expelled into the blood and then being delivered. So it's a combination of all of those different factors. And so we can kind of think of our substrate source coming from four different places in that extent, right? You have, two, which are muscle and then blood. And then those are broken up into two more, which are, so if we're thinking about the muscle, it's glycogen and then it's intramuscular triacylglycerols, or fat, right? So you have your glucose and your fat stores within the muscle. And then you have your glucose, which is coming from the blood, which could either be from the liver or from ingested carbohydrate. And then you have fat as well that then would be coming from your adipose tissue. So it's not like I'm either burning, from the muscle uh, or from the blood. It's a combination of everything and then what's available. Your body isn't making decisions based off of, it's making decisions based off what is easiest to liberate and what is easiest to use.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're going to be using everything that, is being thrown at it. However, if you do not take in any carbohydrate, then you're potentially going to limit your ability to uptake glucose from the blood, because that's just one of those things where to maintain blood glucose levels, you either get it from your food that you're ingesting or from liberation of glycogen from the liver. And if you drop below, there's a concentration that you can't really drop below, because then your brain won't get enough glucose, and then you're not going to have a good day.
Right.
So that is kind of the importance of carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are a very finite source of energy, and it's like, obviously if you're not providing your body with exogenous carbohydrate, then perhaps your body will be favoring muscle glycogen a little bit more. But I still would say, because your liver is still topped off, you have adequate levels of blood glucose, you're still going to be uptaking blood glucose into the muscle cell and then oxidizing it, because at the end of the day, your muscle is going to do everything it possibly can to maintain energy homeostasis throughout all of your exercise. So this is obviously like a complicated topic, substrate oxidation, but it's especially important for a long run, because during extended periods of time, you do run the risk of running out of stores of carbohydrate.
And so, like, a follow-up to my last question is, one of the desired outcomes of training is to train your body to store more glycogen, right, in the muscle. And so I'm guessing like that kind of plays back into the train high, train low, or like you do want some periods where you're on the lower side, I would think, because that's going to be a stimulus. And then the other side of that is, I think I've heard in the past that one of the signals for adaptation is kind of like glycogen depletion in the muscles, and that's going to, like, when you do that, it's going to signal that you need to store more and be more efficient at burning that. And so I guess a question if we're taking on exogenous carbohydrates, can we ever take on enough to replace everything that's being burned in the muscle? Or like, even by fueling, you're still going to get that stimulus because you're depleting the muscles over a long enough timeline.
Yeah, I think the key there is that over a long enough timeline, you will eventually deplete the carbohydrates that are within your muscle. And you have to remember too that you could have, say for example, if you're just doing like a bike ride or something like that, the amount of glycogen that is stored in the working muscle is what is the amount that's available to you, right? You can't take glycogen that's stored in your shoulder, for example, and liberate that from the muscle tissue. So once glucose makes it into the muscle, it's not going anywhere other than to be oxidized for ATP for that specific muscle.
That's super interesting.
Unless, actually, this would be the only caveat, is unless you liberate that glucose molecule by breaking it down into lactate, and then it makes it into the blood and then can be picked up by another muscle somewhere else. That would be the only way that you could actually liberate glucose after it's gone into after it's gone into a muscle without it being oxidized at the working muscle.
So that's super interesting in that, I mean, I learned this when I first started coaching, and I've heard it recently too, is that, you know, like on average, the body can store like up to 2,000 calories of glycogen based on how big an athlete is and how much lean muscle mass and stuff. But it sounds like for a cyclist, I mean, granted, they're probably not going to have that much stored anyway, but it sounds like that might be quite a bit lower for a cyclist who is primarily training their legs.
I don't know. I don't know what, like, you know, what proportion of that actually is, because I would imagine that whatever muscle you're contracting the most is then going to have larger glycogen stores just because of the bioenergetic needs of that muscle. And the continued stimulus. But to go back to your question about the the carbohydrates and expanding or contracting the amount of glycogen that's within your muscle, that's absolutely possible. But I would also say that most likely the exercise is going to be more of a stimulus than just purely like the nutritional intervention. So it's like, yes, if you are, you know, for sure blunting some of the adaptation or some of the signaling mechanisms by taking in carbohydrates. But what I would argue is that the exercise that you're going to be able to do is going to be higher quality for longer, and it's going to result most likely in less of a overall stress. I put stress in quotes because stress is kind of like a loose term. So you're going to wind up, if you are exercising, with greater capacity for glycogen storage, whether you are, you know, completely fasted or whether you are taking carbohydrates or not. It's just a matter of, you know, are you truly optimizing or maximizing? And for most people, I don't think it really matters, because I think that the exercise stimulus is going to still outweigh the consumption you know, changes, or the blunting of signals with consumption. And that's something that I think people get really lost in the weeds about, is they're like, oh, well, I gotta, you know, do a really hard workout, you know, the day before I then do my fasted cardio in order to stimulate the most fat oxidation potential, because then I'm glycogen depleted. And when I'm glycogen depleted, I'm going to be stimulating the greatest capacity. No. We're getting way too lost in the weeds in terms of, like, you know, trying to pick apart and like exactly optimize. Is like, chances are, if you are following a consistent training plan that is specific enough for you, and you're doing like a long workout and progressing that over time, you're going to get really good adaptations. Just like for example, the you know, like everyone says, oh, well, you have to do, you know, like, you have to be on a high-fat diet with fasted cardio in order to maximize fat oxidation potential during exercise. And granted, you know, this may be a bad example slightly, but the Norwegian guys are able to get 1.8 to 2 point something grams per minute of fat oxidation with eating a high-carb diet. So it's like the exercise stimulus, I think, you know, greatly trumps anything else that's going to be happening. And if anything, you're just setting yourself up for more potential negative ramifications by limiting the amount of food you're eating, because then you're going to be running a calorie deficit. And I think we've talked about this, or at least I've talked about this on the podcast, is that when you're running a calorie deficit, it's essentially like trying to build a house, but you only have a finite amount of bricks. So once the house gets tall enough, you have to start taking bricks from the bottom and start stacking them up on top of each other. And it's only a matter of time before it's like a Jenga block or tower and just falls over.
Right.
So it's like, yes, there is an optimal way to do it, but I don't recommend that to people, because I would rather have them be fueled properly and get slightly less adaptations, which are then going to be driven over time, because you're going to be able to go from a 4-hour long workout to a 6-hour long workout, and you're just going to be able to stay more specific. And plus, in a racing scenario, I don't know anybody who doesn't eat carbohydrates, even like those ultra marathoners who, go high fat for very long periods of time. They still take in carbohydrates during their high intensity stuff and during their races. So it's right. This is kind of a rant about, don't go too far on each end of the spectrum, keep it in the middle and stay consistent. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
No, this talk quickly turned into a debate about low carb versus high carb.
Right.
That wasn't the intention, but it just shows the importance of it, right? And it's that really like our goal with any athlete is, we've talked about this over and over again, it's about consistency and being able to create or to complete high quality training day in and day out, week in and week out. And by not eating enough carbohydrate, chances are you risk that, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll also say too, so one of the things I was thinking about before this conversation, kind of turned into more bioenergetics and substrate utilization, which I absolutely love, was that if you're thinking about like the grand scheme of things in terms of what predicts endurance performance, we have VO2 max, we have second threshold, we have economy, durability, so your ability to maintain those three variables without fatigue. And then at the center of it seems to kind of be your ability to deliver oxygen and uptake it at the level of the muscle. So if we think about, the long workout, it's not going to help you build your VO2 max because it's just simply not high enough intensity. There might be some changes to your second threshold, but I would say most likely fairly minimal because, again, it's not specific enough to that high intensity to be able to actually push it higher. So I would say that, what we would see if somebody did a lot of long workouts was increases to economy. So the amount of oxygen they're using for a given speed and their durability would actually, would be flatter, would be better.
I want to go back on this. So on the VO2 max and the second threshold.
Mm-hmm.
So part of that, right? Like, so part of VO2 max is muscle capillarization and mitochondria at the muscle.
Absolutely.
And also same thing with second threshold.
Yeah.
And how do you stimulate those?
No, so you're absolutely right. And that's why I said most likely would not result in great increases to VO2 max.
Okay. Got it.
So again, words matter, right? And so, so if you're thinking about it, like, you're not going like if you are in the beginning of whatever training it is, any training you do is going to stimulate all of those predictors of performance. Like it's just the way your body is trying to adapt to, make exercise less of a stress. But if you are going to get way more bang for your buck in terms of developing VO2 max by doing VO2 max intervals than doing your long workout. However, I will say that long workout is an integral part in being able to grow your VO2 max because of exactly what you were arguing, Dave, is that you have increases in capillarization. You have sustained periods of stimulating the heart, which is going to allow for better oxygen delivery. You have expansion of mitochondrial volume density, which is also important for utilization of oxygen, which is then going to potentially push second threshold even higher because the second threshold seems to be dictated by our body's ability to maintain oxygen delivery and utilization and where that balance point is. So I'm not saying that, your long workout is only going to be good for one thing. It's going to potentially give you the ability to improve all, but what's really happened, like what the big focus or focal point is going to be are improvements in economy at the speed that you're working at, because you're doing it for extended periods of time, and the durability of your body at that exercise intensity as well. I think that is what is going to be, most benefited by this.
Okay. So what are just thinking about this, because I've kind of heard about durability in like ultra running terms. And so the intensity they're working at is typically pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so for me, like the durability thing kind of drives me nuts too, because I feel like it's just another way of saying endurance or
Yeah.
Or the last 5 years it was fatigue resistance, and now it's durability. But it's like, okay, so we've got a new term for it.
Yep.
But it's like, I think this is a thing where it's like, you know, like a lot of people might be racing at more like that high zone 3, low zone 4 type intensity. But if they're doing a lot of long rides at more zone 2, zone 3, you're saying that that's going to improve their economy at zone 2, zone 3, not so much at their race pace.
Right. Yeah. Like yes, it's, you know, your body is going to adapt specifically to what you are doing. So when we think about a long workout, if you're exercising only in zone 2 or, you know, at the top end of zone 2, then you're certainly going to get better economy at the top end of zone 2, and you're going to be more fatigue resistant or durable at the top end of zone 2. So therefore, you probably need to do specific work, you know, as you get closer to your race at the race pace that you're actually going to be doing.
Yeah. I feel like at this point, the podcast should just be called Everything in Moderation, because I feel like every episode we just that ends up being the takeaway is that yes, these are important tools, but they're not the only tool, and so it needs to be part of a well-balanced diet of training.
Yes. 100% agree with you there, Dave. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about, is like, even my tagline on my Instagram is, you know, helping individuals optimize their physiology to maximize their endurance potential. But then my idea of optimal is more of like, what is the most practical thing that you can be doing? Because what is practical becomes optimal, not like, what are these studies saying that say, oh, well, you know, I keep picking on like the high intensity days to deplete, you know, muscle glycogen, and then wake up and do your, you know, cardio fasted or something like that to stimulate, you know, pathways for fat oxidation and glycogen storage and those sort of things. But it really, that is a perfect example of this hyper optimization sort of thing that is coming up, you know, more and more and more. I love it. Right. And so yes, I 100% agree. This just needs to be, you know, it's like everything in moderation, including moderation. Sometimes you need to go hard, you know, to get better at stuff. But overall, I think my takeaways for the long workout is that it's absolutely integral and important for, you know, no matter if you're doing super, super long races or shorter races, it's going to be another stimulus for your body to adapt to that is going to help to increase more of those submaximal characteristics that we're looking at, right? Fatigue resistance, economy, and then substrate turnover. And in terms of bioenergetics and other things like that, it's just going to give your body accumulated bouts of time of, you know, oxygen delivery to the muscle with extended periods of time of oxygen utilization as well. Yeah.
I agree with all that. And I would say my takeaway just kind of is, you know, we said tongue in cheek that everything in moderation. And I think you just said it, where it's like the hyper optimization. It's like, just do the damn work. Mm-hmm. It's consistency that matters. And like, don't get so into the weeds about like trying to optimize for this and trying to optimize for this, because the body is super, super, super complicated. Mm-hmm. And even when we're studying it in a lab, we're trying to like reduce it down to like 2 or 3 things. But the reality is that there's so many things that are going into not only how our bodies work, but also performance. Like, performance is not just physiology.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so that's my takeaway, is like, don't get so caught up in like, how is my physiology changing with this long ride or long run, but also how is this preparing me for my race? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. So if you guys have any more topics or questions about this topic, you can find me at Critical02 on Instagram. You can find Dave at Kaizen Endurance on Instagram. He also has a podcast Instagram, right, called Training Babble Podcast.
You got it. Yeah, Training Babble Off-Road, I think.
Training Babble Off-Road. If you're interested in listening to more of these Fast Physiology talks, go over to Training Babble, anywhere you listen to your podcast, and you can listen to other topics that Dave and I talk about. And like I said, if you guys have any questions, let us know. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this conversation that, you know, kind of weaved itself in and out of the long workout and other sort of optimization things. We enjoyed it, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.